And welcome to Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World. I'm Richard Dugan, your host, and I thank you so much for joining us here on the program because I think you're going to enjoy today's program. I will give the basic particulars here in just a little bit, but I'm going to give you a little hint as to the conversation we're going to have with our very special guest all the way from the big boot country in Europe, Italy, and this is the subject matter.
Your stories, that's what we live. Short stories, they just take what they will give. Short stories, that's all it's ever been. Don't worry about the ending, babe, before we begin.
And we're going to be talking with Gary Smith, the author of a collection of short stories and poems as well. Gary, I want to thank you so much for either staying up late or getting up early to join us here on the program, all the way from Italy. And I guess you might call it, as I've heard this phrase before, your lonely writer's garret.
Correct. Pretty much so.
It's great to have you with us and to talk about this, because I've often said it on this program that we all experience the same emotions. The intensities change, and that's what makes us similar, makes us alike. That's what connects us, is the emotions that we experience. What makes us unique is those stories. And they are short, because there's nothing that goes on forever. I mean, your life has a certain span of time, and then it's, as they say, ashes to ashes, dust to dust, and so forth. So, but you've also put together some poems throughout this particular work. You've also written a number of other books. We may touch upon some of those as well, but let's talk a little bit about your connection. Obviously, you have an affinity because you're there. I have an affinity to Ireland. I'm not there, but I'm working on it. But you obviously have a connection with that part of the world and that particular country. Can you give us a little background on that?
Well, yeah, from the time I was very little, my grandmother used to tell me, when you go, they will know you. And you grow up not really understanding what that means. And then there comes a point in time when the immediate family and the elders have all passed on, and there's an urge to see what she meant, where that place may be. So on our 20th wedding anniversary, my wife and I decided to come to Italy. I'd been searching for 6 or 8 months. Wasn't sure whether this was the right little village or not, and walked in and found out that my great-grandfather's grain mill was still there, been there since the year 700, and this little town of 200 people. And the next thing I know, this lady was standing behind me asking me to please come to her house for coffee. When we went over there for coffee, she put her arms around me and said, "Welcome home. We've been waiting a long time for you to come home. This is the house your grandfather was born in." And I had no clue. I was the first American to have walked in this town since my grandfather's last visit in 1960. So I was taken back to find this little hamlet full of cousins that I had no clue about. So I've been coming back for the last 10 years ever since then.
Wow. And I'm sure that not only are there some great memories there that you've been told about, and some that you've probably created yourself, but also do you pick up on, shall we say, that ancestry, that energy from the ancestry on that land, and kind of get the inspiration, if you will, sometimes, maybe for some of your stories or poems and so forth that you write?
Absolutely. I feel my house, the house I'm zooming from, is on the path he walked every day down to the mill with his dad to work in the granary. And right now, the village has about 200 people, is all the people we have. And so it's, you can't get away from the deep roots, and go back to about the 1600s that I've found so far here with church records and stuff. And so, yeah, it's a really incredible place. It's the church was built the year 1000, our church in this village where my grandfather was baptized. And so every morning, every walk through the village, you're reminded of your family history and your ties to, like you said before, to other people. To we're all tied together, and this just keeps underscoring that principle.
Well, Gary Smith is our guest here on the program. We're talking about, in particular, his latest work, collection of short stories and poems. And it, of course, is available through his website, which is GarySmithAuthor.com. And we certainly hope that you'll go there. We'll be linked to your website, Gary, so that folks can, as they're listening to or watching this program, the podcast or videocast, they'll be able to click on that link and go to your website and read more about you and the books that you have available. It's amazing how long have you been writing?
I try to get out a book every year, so it's been 7 years. I wrote the first novel in 2015. It was published early 2016.
Well, you also have another book called Willing, and I want to get into that as well. But you also have a book of your own photographs. You have been into photography, ever since your uncle gave you your first camera.
Yeah, absolutely. He gave me a camera, and I guess the bank gave it to him for a large deposit, or in the days you get a toaster or something, and he got a cheap little camera, and he gave it to me, and I was fascinated with it. And but in the days the family didn't have money, film was expensive, so didn't do much with it. But it was he planted the seed, and it was always something I wanted to get back to. And then the wife wanted a camera when the children was young to photograph them, and I bought her 35 millimeter single lens reflex, and before you know it, I was winning some awards and found another path of creativity for myself.
Well, you and I have a connection there because I have loved photography. Took a black and white course in junior college many years ago, and I was using at that time a camera my father gave me. It's an old an Argus 35 millimeter camera. I still have the flash attachment, and this attachment's a pretty good size attachment. And I also learned very early on when I tried using it, do not use the flash attachment when you're trying to do close-ups of someone, because that flash gets really hot. Those are the kinds of bulbs that it used, and it was a one-timer. It's not like your phone now that just quickly recharges and you take another one, flash. So, and that course that I took taught me an awful lot about the processing. I took not only great pride, but I felt very accomplished at the ability that I developed, no pun intended, to be able to create a print literally from the shot to developing the film to then using my enlarger to expose the paper to the negative, to then processing it through the chemicals, and then, of course, doing the hanging and so forth. By the way, I also found a very interesting method for making sure that the image, the paper on the side where the image is, came out smooth, that I read about, and that is you take a piece of glass or a mirror, either or, and you take your wet image and you squeegee it onto the mirror, and it will stay flat and it will be shiny, it will be smooth. And it was one of those techniques that I picked up on. So I have always had an affinity. And, of course, nowadays, it's all digital. And of course, I know there are other programs, but obviously the most popular one, of course, seems to be Photoshop, which I I still say that I have just scratched the surface, and I've been using it for years. Scratched the surface on all the things that it can do, but it does what I want it to do, and I can find what I need to do this and that and the other thing, and it's just a fun thing to do, to play with those images digitally.
Absolutely. And I was fortunate enough that as I progressed through that career to apply and I was accepted to a workshop with Ansel Adams and Ruth Bernhard and all the great. And as a side note to what you were just saying, Ansel Adams was all about the tools in your toolkit. He got a lot of criticism for the zone system and making us know the properties of the film we're using so that we could control it. But sitting in his kitchen one day, he was so excited because Polaroid had brought him back, and it was just the beginning of using pixels. And he was so excited to see the future. Everybody else was paranoid. They'd all these years to learn this exact skill, how to print and go through the process you were talking about. And he was excited. No, you're going to have every tool you've ever dreamed of in your toolbox to be totally creative. You won't be limited by film speed and light. And so he was a pretty amazing guy. But he's seen the future, and he loved it. The ability you would have with the tools available now on your iPhone.
Yeah. We are talking with Gary Smith. He is the author of the latest work, which is a collection of short stories and poems, and we are very grateful for him giving us this time all the way from Italy as we continue here on Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan, your host, and it is really a pleasure to have you here and also to talk about these works and so forth. And I wanted to add to our little conversation there about photography. When you talked about, of course, Ansel Adams, obviously sort of he's not the father of photography, but he certainly is sort of the godfather, if you will, the man you look up to, the man that you look to get inspiration, education as well, as you have alluded to. And one of the aspects of digital photography and pixels makes me think of one painter in particular, one artist. And they made a Broadway play out of him, and one of his works, his name was George Seurat, and Sunday in the Park with George, and how he didn't use strokes, he used dots, which are similar to pixels, and even when you are printing, and I took a printing class in high school, believe it or not. And I remember learning about how they, early on, before they had the big metal sheets that you'd put on the rollers of a printer, pictures were made from dots on the page, and they had to get them just right in position and so forth, or whatever the process was. But they were black dots and gray dots, and in terms of the intensity of the ink before they had those rollers. So there is a similarity across the board. There
was a very famous painter during the Renaissance, during the period of Monet that painted with dots, and I forget his name, but very famous painter.
Yeah.
You can look at it.
By the way, if anyone wants to look up that play, it starred Mandy Patinkin and Bernadette Peters. And I remember watching that. I even have the album. And I just listening to him sing those songs, as well as to have the camera angles, the way they set it up, because they obviously did this for the purposes of a video. They'd have the camera on the back side of basically an opaque canvas, and you could see him from his face side, poking at the canvas, and the canvas would move a little bit, making the dots. And I thought, that's extraordinary. And then, of course, when you step back, And you've probably seen some photographs. Well, I don't know if you call them photographs, maybe more along the lines of mosaics, where if you are at a distance, you see this beautiful picture. Maybe it's a scene, maybe it's a person's face, that kind of thing. But if you zoom in, it's made up of a bunch of other pictures. A bunch of other pictures. To me, that is extraordinary that someone would take the time to find just the right photograph that had the right shading from a distance to then create this image that you would see from a distance. And it's fascinating. I will also share with you that my brother-in-law, my eldest sister's husband, from the day I met him over 40 years ago, he had a camera around his neck all the time. And when we held my sister's memorial back in April, he said, as he was sharing with the congregation at the church we were at, he says, I went through thousands of pictures just to hone it down to 300. And 300 is still a lot of pictures. And some of them were just spectacular, some of the pictures that he took. And I don't know that he was necessarily an artist. He just liked to record experiences. And it's so much different for him, I believe, in the way he was doing it, than the way people do it today. I mean, people are taking pictures of everything, their food and this thing and that thing and the other thing. I look for sort of extraordinary and unusual things to take pictures of, like cloud formations. I have one that looks like a dirigible, an airship. It's a huge puffy cloud, looks like an airship. But anyway, so what kinds, and you have a book that talks about this, if I am not mistaken, that people can find on your website as well. It's sort of what would you say, a picture book?
Well, there's two. There's one which is a 25-year retrospective, which is after 25 years, I went from using a 4x5 view camera, lugging that around, and to have control with where you could change the lines of perspective and stuff. You get to a point at some point where the creative process, you go out for photographs, you're looking for the things that you're going to photograph that you can manipulate as a painter would do. And so you can change lines of perspective, and might take me in them days 3 months from the time I went out and took one shot with the view camera in the desert to having a print that I would be able to sell. And then if someone bought that print, they would get, of course, one redone in the darkroom, and so it would be close, right? But it would be hand done, so it wouldn't be exactly. And then 25 years later, they go out with a cell phone and create the same kind of imagery and come back within an hour and have your printer printing it out. It was a unique perspective. So the first part of the book is the difference between then and now, and you can see the quality in the photographs and are the same. It's just a whole lot easier now, and you're more creative because you can do more. On my phone right now, I've probably got 3,000 photographs. It's just on my phone, and so it's instead of a 35 millimeter now around my neck, which was intermediate, then I go out and run and I'll see a sunrise that I want or something. All the photographs in my books, my hardcover books, or all my photographs, which is unique as an author. I get to insert my own photographs in the story, and so the book covers are all my photographs, and so it's progressive. It's they kind of intertwine,
Yeah. Well, I will tell you that the cover of your book, a collection of short stories and poems, it's a beautiful. I love of course, I have an affinity for rain clouds, and of course, here in California, we're looking for rain, all the time. They say it doesn't rain in Southern California, and I think that becomes more and more true. But we do get our share. We're talking with the author of a collection of short stories and poems, Gary Smith. Gary Smith author. I don't know why author got caught in my throat there. GarySmithAuthor.com is the website. We hope that you'll go there as we continue our conversation here on Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan, your host, and Gary Smith, who's the author of a collection of short stories and poems. I wanted to ask you a little bit about the book. And you start out with what I love is this first story that starts your book, called Country Love, and it makes me think of a song. Country love is kisses in the kitchen. Country love is honest and it's true. Tell us about this story.
Well, actually, it's courtly love.
I beg your pardon. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, forget about what I just said. I had a little dyslexia there.
Yeah, well, I'm very dyslexic, so no apology needed. But that come out of a time when I was researching the Renaissance, and courtly love was a thing a code that they lived by. I mean, they married in them days. If you're a peasant, you married because you needed help to raise food for the family. If you're a noble, you married for political reasons. But at the same time, they knew at some point in their life they would run across their true love. So they had a whole code called courtly love. You could fall in love with the queen, and you could wear her colors in battle or in a jousting match, or you could take her on picnics. But then there were things you couldn't do, which was the fall of Sir Lancelot. He breached that, and so I thought it was interesting in our culture today. It's almost like a taboo to have fallen in love with somebody that's not your spouse, even though you don't act on it, nothing happens, which is kind of the theme of the first book of mine, The Willing. Nothing was going to happen between these two, and she was married and he wasn't. And so in this book, that's kind of that flavor. That's what that was about, is he falls in love instantly with this woman, and she's married, and he ends up going there for Easter. He ends up visiting with the family, and they have this kind of a courtly love relationship where they both respect everybody. And then her husband dies, and he supports her through that grief, and they at the end up together. But so that was the basis of that one.
Yeah, you kind of hear these stories in modern times of people who they have this childhood sweetheart and so forth, but they go their separate ways, but they still remember that person, and they go off and they marry and they have a family and all of this, and then their respective spouses may pass, or they separate and what have you, and somehow fate brings them together once again in their later years, and it's like almost as if they pick up right where they left off before they departed those years and years ago, to have a great romance, that the embers are just there and they're glowing, and it's just a wonderful, wonderful story. Very, very cool. I also wanted to ask, you talk about how you have your photographs in your books, and I love I'm guessing this is a lake, with the title of this particular story, The Photographer. And is that story about you?
Well, I think as a writer, I think if you do, I've always said there's craft people and there's writers, and that's true for photography and for writing. And so if you're creative, you're going to have yourself in your work. And so that's I get asked all the time by people that say they can't. They run the same paths I run. They don't see the same scenes I've seen, and so. Yeah, I don't photograph scenery. I photograph feeling, and so that particular story is a kind of way of answering that question about how those photographs come about,
I think if you look long enough at the photographs, and I'm looking at some of them right now, in the back of the book, in the back of his book, which is which is of course a collection of short stories and poems, it's the section called Poems, and he has a photograph on each page on both sides as you flip through, and I think that's one of the things that a lot of people in the arts, okay, to broaden it up a little bit, they want to, maybe the term is evoke an emotion, or at the very least, they want to express a particular emotion that they are having through whatever medium, whether it's photography, whether it's music or painting or sculpting, or again, whatever that medium might be. And I know that I'm kind of going through that process right now with the completion of my book that I'm looking forward to having out on the 22nd of December of this year. 12/22/22. That's my dream right now, and I think that this time, I'm going to make it. When was your first book published? And to that end, how did you feel when you had it in your hands for the first time?
There's no greater feeling than when the author's copy comes to the house and you pick it up and you hold it in your hand. The work that goes, 6, 7, 8 months of writing every day. As you know, if you're writing a book, the amount of time that goes into writing a book, and then the rewrites, and then the have it and hold it in your hand. There's no words to describe that feeling, and it makes the whole process worthwhile.
Have you lost that feeling at all as each successive book comes out, or is it still a nice feeling?
The edge comes off it somewhat, but which is why this book come about. After writing 5 books as a series, which didn't start out to be a series, started out to be The Willing, and then everybody wanted a sequel, and then the sequel led into a 3rd book, and then pretty soon you're writing a series. You get to a point to where you're not feeling as challenged because the characters in the next book have already been defined for 3 books. And so you look for a little bit of a challenge. So that was this book, and which I didn't realize how big a challenge that was going to be. So yeah, I had that feeling at the end of this book to write 24 short stories. I mean, most collections of short stories come after a writer's been writing short stories for this magazine, that magazine over a period of many years, and they put them together as a collection, kind of like a greatest hits album for a music group. But to sit down and then a week later, change gears to all new characters, a whole new story. One's a haunted house, one's a murder mystery, one's a deep love. It was very, very challenging. But it was good because it opened up my creativity and made me work harder and get out of that rut of just writing. And so it was very beneficial. Just finished the 7th book. I'm hoping that it'll be published in July. We're going through the rewrites and stuff now. And so, yeah, it's back. I'm excited about this book, the new book.
Wonderful, wonderful. And we encourage folks to go to your website, which, of course, is GarySmithAuthor.com. As I said before, we'll be linked to that website so people can find out more about you and the work that you are doing and keep abreast of the latest releases that you have as we continue here on Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan, your host, and we're talking with author and photographer Gary Smith. GarySmithAuthor.com is the website. Gary, I was intrigued by, of course, the incorporation of your photography within the pages of your book. Not only in this collection, a collection of short stories and poems, but also the fact that you've got the images in there, and it makes me think about the process that I was going through when I was taking that semester-long black and white course, and what I would do is I would take the pictures, process them, so forth, and then I would put them on a mat board, and some of them I would then flip the mat board over with the photograph face down. I would tape a piece of 8.5 by 11 ruled paper, and based upon that photograph, I would write a story. Now, it's not going to be a long one because you only have one sheet of paper there, you know. But I would come up with, and I only did a few of these. I didn't spend a lot of time on that particular mode. But does a photograph help? Like with it, let's say with this collection of short stories and poems, did you think of the poem as you were, say, sifting through the different photographs that you had taken, and okay, let's put this one in the book, and let's put that one in the book? Was there a poem and or a story? For example, that first story that you have in here, the courtly love. You have a picture in there. Is that something that you've got going?
Well, it's twofold. With the poems, they come quickly because of the photograph. Maybe I'm out on most of all the photographs in the section of poems. I'm out on a long run, and it's just like in the photographer. What happens is a feeling will come. I'll see a scene. I'll come upon a pond, and I'll get a feeling and an emotion, and I take I'll take the photograph, and when I get back to the car, I quickly just write out a quick poem. That's why they're so short. With the book, I got 3,000, like I said, photographs on my phone, and so I just write the book. But then in the rewrites, as I'm going through rereading the stories, I'll remember a photograph I have in my library that will help enhance that scene. Maybe like the courtly love when she's sketching Donatello, right? And I remember, I've been in that exact museum, I think 2 or 3 times, and so I go through my file until I found that picture of Donatello to put in there to help the reader get a sense of that bit of history that's in that story. And that's true for wherever I put a photograph. It's that's how that comes about.
I'm Richard Dugan, and you are listening to Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World. We're talking with Gary Smith about his book, A Collection of Short Stories and Poems. And we are also talking about his photography work as well. And we hope that you will stay right with us here on Tell Me Your Story. Gary Smith joining us here on the program. And Gary, I want to thank you for joining us all the way from Italy. It's really a pleasure to be talking with you, not just from that distance, but also from the standpoint of being an author. Now, you've written a number of books already. You've also incorporated many of your photographs, which I have to tell you, some very beautiful photographs. And I would take it, because you mentioned this earlier in the program, that obviously Ansel Adams was a huge contributor to the formation of you as a photographer, right?
Correct. Yeah, very much so.
Talk to us a little bit about not only your experiences with him and obviously he had a lot to say in influencing you, but also in terms of how you view photography in the area of importance. Let's just say in terms of the combination. You're a writer and you're a photographer, and you manage to be able to combine the two, which is really, I think, really very, very cool.
And the question is, I'm sorry.
How do you merge the two? I mean, does that come naturally for you?
Yeah, I think they're both the same. I think a lot of artists have multi-disciplines. I know people that that are poets that also write song lyrics and maybe do some sculpture on the side. So I don't see them so much as separate disciplines, especially the way I write. I write in first person. And when I take photographs, I'm photographing a feeling that I'm feeling that particular moment or that day. And I will, as described in the one short story, I'll find elements to fit that mood and put them in there, move them around. Sometimes when I get back, I got to flip the negative over, or the image now, the digital image over, change the lighting and whatnot until I create what that is. Writing's the same thing. You know, you've got something you want to say. It's a deep feeling. And so then you start imagining a scene or circumstance that will bring those feelings out. So I don't see them different, actually. Pretty much the same process.
Have you ever been out photographing and suddenly you realize from that photograph that you might even be taking, maybe you don't even notice it until after you get into, I want to say until you get into the dark room, but we both know better than that nowadays.
No more. Thank God.
But is it a while you're taking the shot, or maybe after, that you realize, you know, there's a story here, or this photograph, this picture, this image, this scene would really. This would be really cool in a particular book I'm writing and so forth and so on. Is that come to you often?
Not so much that way. Sometimes I'll say something and I'll say, "Well, this I can make a book cover out of this." But most of the time, I'll come across a scene, or I'm out on a long run, and I'll start. Something's been eating at me, you know, something I've been a little depressed or whatever. But the feeling will come first, and then I'll look around and find the elements that I need to collect. So when I get back, I can create a photograph and put it in the library. Well, like I mentioned it earlier, I got 3,000 photographs just on my phone. So pretty much if I'm writing a story and there's a scene, then a photograph that will come to mind that will fit that scene, you know. And generally it's kind of the same feeling, you know. I mean, I think of the photograph and it provokes the feeling that I was just writing about in that scene.
Now, you have several other books out, including a collection of short stories and poems. We'll talk more about that as well. But you also have, as you've mentioned earlier, The Willing, A Life Separated Together, which I kind of like that some might say oxymoron. Undomesticated, My Life, My Choice, and Vengeance Can Be Deadly. Now, some of these may actually be novels, fiction, but I like the title in particular, My Life, My Choice. Now, tell us a little bit about that. Is that a novel there, or are we talking more personal kind of?
No, they're all. It's a series, and they're all novels.
Okay.
And each one builds kind of on the other. Although a lot of my readers read them separately, they'll read My Life, My Choice. Yeah.
They stand alone well, is what you're saying.
They stand alone well, and yet I see somebody will love Vengeance Can Be Deadly. Then they'll go back and they'll start the series from the beginning. You know, I've gotten emails that say, you know, I'm going back. I'm going to read all of them from the beginning. So, you know, A Life Separate Together. Each of them have kind of an underlying message or theme. A Life Separate Together is how do two successful people madly in love, they come together, and then how do they manage that life? And this is all within a mystery story. They're being chased and trying to be murdered, and yet they're trying to maintain their separate lives, to create a separate lives. In that book, she's a budding songwriter and artist, and he's a writer. All of them, he's a writer. And so how do you maintain that balance and not have one personality take over the other? Life Separate Together is it starts off with them getting involved with the FBI and a mafia family whose son was kidnapped, or nephew was kidnapped, and asked for his help because of his ties to the FBI to help find him. And so then that ends up leading into a terrorist plot to blow up the Emmys, and gets resolved at the end of the novel.
Well, the titles are very intriguing, and I'm just curious as to. I know that there are a lot of instances. There are a lot of instances where the publisher usually might determine, or marketing might determine the title. Were you able to choose your titles? Because, as I said, they kind of ring really true for us here on this program, especially My Life, My Choice, which is part of what we talk about, giving people choices and knowledge of those choices to help make their dreams come true. And I know that's a little different from the story that you've written, but nonetheless, it just rings really well in my ear in that regard.
Yeah, well, in particular, that book, it's not too far-fetched from that, because throughout the intrigue and the chasing and the dynamics of the plots, and ends up almost being two plots, he has to the underlying message is how we judge people sometimes before we know them. Okay, he ends up the terrorist that he thinks he's chasing ends up saving his life, and he has to sit back and kind of reflect on his choices in life, how they were determined maybe at youth, and reflect how he would look and see people in the first order. And so, no, I chose all my titles and all my book covers, and I'm adamant about that. And I know there's been, with the first publisher, they thought I should write in third person, and I won't do that neither. I did one book in third person, but it seems like it distances yourself from the scenes. You know, it's. I can see maybe in a murder mystery why they wouldn't want first person, because you're reading in a first person, and it's like you going in to do the murder instead of somebody else, right? And Joe ain't going in to do the murder. I'm going in to do the murder, and
It's like, what does he know? I mean, how close to this story is he really?
Well, people thought that undomesticated. That's full of murders. It starts off. I've always had this idea: what happens if a serial killer falls in love with a serial killer that comes to town, and they end up dating each other, and so it comes out of that kind of a thought process, and a philosopher who. Don Luis, who mentions in his philosophy book that none of us are ever happy until we undomesticate ourselves. Because from the time we're born, we're being told how to be, how to perceive things, school, culture, influence us, and that at some point, we don't know who we are. And in this particular story, this woman detective, who's their best detective, is the serial killer, and she considers herself undomesticated, and that the underlying premise is we all agree we kill to sustain life, food, clothing. It all comes from a plant dying or an animal dying, but in her small world, to be undomesticated, you have to feed the soul, and so you murder just. When you're a little depressed, you go out and kill something to a person to become to feed your soul. The same way you have to feed your body for life.
It's a very interesting.
That come out of that premise, and so it gets a little twisted in there, pretty much.
Yeah, I was going to say that's a very interesting perspective and premise as well. It's interesting, too, how we've talked on this program many times about choices, and how I bring this up on occasion, and then I add one of my guests' comments about how all the choices we've made have brought us to this point. I mean, it sounds kind of weird, Gary, but all the choices that you've made and that I've made, even as kids, have brought us to this moment right here, right now, where you and I were having this conversation. And then, of course, in terms of the future, it's the same thing. All the choices that we make today and tomorrow and the next day will place us where we'll be in 5 years, 10 years, etc. To which my guest said, that's true. However, you will need to take a look at that last part and say, he says, that all of your choices from this point forward, even from the past to the present, are determined by your perspective of what you think your future will be. And I had never really thought about it in that context before. And I know some would even put that under the category of, all your beliefs and your thoughts are going to determine, and your fears and all of that kind of stuff are going to determine, what your choices will be today and tomorrow and the next day. And I hadn't really looked at it from that perspective. And then that kind of opens up the door, Gary, to the aspect of, I really don't like my perspective of the future. I myself, I'm an optimist. I believe that, there's still so much more that we as human beings can accomplish and that I can accomplish and that I want to do. And I want to do those things. And so my glass is half full. I'm not sure what it's full of, but it's half full anyway. What are your thoughts in that regard, especially in light of these books?
Yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah.
I throughout all those books, the series, Warren Stilgrave, the main character, that's his perspective. And he's very much aware through each of those novels of the choices he's making and how they're going to affect the future of himself. And in the last one, Vengeance Can Be Deadly, he has to come to grips with himself towards the end of that novel. He suffers a health problem that almost cost him his life. And as he's laying there recovering, he's thinking that how he's always allowed certain things to make some of those decisions and what it's denied him in the past. And he makes the determination that no more he's going to have these other he's going to drop all considerations when he's making a decision and making more in the here and now.
How now? Granted, as a writer, your all is put into these books, but I'm curious as to how much of your life, your thoughts, feelings, beliefs, attitudes, and so forth are incorporated. Do you see yourself in the characters that you're writing about?
I don't, but a lot of people around me do. Hemingway said it best. He says, to write it, you've had to experience it. So there's no doubt in my mind that if, as a writer, you're putting your experiences of certain situations, even when you build a character, it's somebody in your past that you've known, and you might take part of this person's personality and another friend or some acquaintance's personality into that character. But you're people, and from family members, it's been terrible. I mean, I've had calls from family members say, I know this scene you wrote is about Uncle Charlie. And it's not, and you can't tell them, no, that's not Uncle Charlie, I think I know who this character is, that kind of thing. There's a lot of my life through there. I wouldn't say in particular they're written autobiography like or nothing, but they're my experiences throughout my life, pretty much.
We're talking with Gary Smith. We're talking with him about the work that he does, not only the writing, but the photography as well. And we are going to continue doing just that, ladies and gentlemen, right here on Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan, your host, and I'm fascinated, Gary Smith, author of a collection of short stories and poems by the process of writing. And I realize that this may come across to some folks as a little pedestrian. Oh, this question is always asked. But I am a little curious about your process because I'm learning about mine as well as I'm trying to finish my book here in 2022. after 21 years. And I know it doesn't take you that long. You pump out one, you say one every year or so, every year or two?
About every year.
Yeah. How much research do you go into, or does the book just flow out of you and you put it on the page or the computer or what have you? I know some people are that way.
Yeah, it pretty much flows for me. I have found it really pretty easy. In this last book, collection of short stories, 4 or 5 of the stories are probably nonfiction. They are. Annie and the Bat, for one, is a true story, and Kevin is pretty close to home. Is a true story about the death of my son, and so a lot of those come from actual events. The rest are pretty much different scenes from my life that put together, but it comes pretty quickly for me once I sit down. With the novels, once I get past probably chapter 2, my characters seem to take over and they start writing. I'm just really putting down what they're doing and how what they're dictating, basically. And so it comes very quickly.
It's kind of like with me in this program. The universe asks the questions. I'm just along for the ride.
Absolutely. Yeah. Same process sometimes,
Absolutely. I remember in a program I was producing, and we were talking about the source for an artist. And authors and photographers, they're artists. Okay, so this is the way it was described by the host of the program as it was shared with her by someone else. And so it's kind of like second or third hand, but nonetheless, it's like you have at the top of the Empire State Building, you have this lightning rod. And the lightning will hit that rod and, of course, diffuse down into the ground. But that's sort of the analogy, if you will, the visual analogy of where the artist gets their inspiration and gets their the spark, if you will, no pun intended, for creating what they create. I know that for me, I actually was searching for an old manuscript that I'd started back in 1994 on a computer, the very first computer that I worked on. And I finally found that document, that manuscript. And I'm incorporating bits and pieces of it into my present day, the book that I'm writing. I would take it, you just kind of mentioned it to us already, that, you have gathered stuff from your past. Have you, as you go through a day or a week and what have you, and you come across old photographs maybe, those tend to spur you with ideas?
Yeah, sometimes. In particular, in the book, My Life, My Choice, I wasn't going to do any more in the series. I wanted to do something different. But I went out on a 4-mile, 5-mile run, and the first 3 chapters just kept coming in my head. And so there was something in there I had to deal with. And so when I got back, I sat down and started writing that book. It was funny. I wasn't in my ideas to do that, but somewhere in my soul there was still something that an itch I had to scratch, something that still wasn't resolved in that series of books. And yeah.
Interesting. I'm curious too if you've ever lost an idea. I was coming down the hill to come to work one day, and this was shortly after my sister's passing, and I started thinking of this song, and I sang these 4 lines of a verse, but I had no way of recording it in any way, shape, or form. Didn't even have my stone tablet and chisel because I was driving. And I'm going, oh my gosh, I hope it will come back, or at least I hope somebody else gets these lines, then we'll put them into something. Have you ever had that frustration where you're running, let's say you're out for your jog or what have you, and the idea comes and you get back and, where'd it go? Where? I got to find it. It was so good.
Yeah, I think we've all had that experience. And I've always justified it by saying, well, I guess maybe it wasn't that good an idea. like, self-preservation, right?
Yeah, I hear you.
And I think that's true. Same with photographs. There was times I would give anything that had my camera or my phone, or I get it out and before I can snap, the lights changed or the scenes changed, and you think, God, I could have captured that. But, there's a million more coming down the road. They're like a bus, every 20 minutes there's another one coming by.
That's true. Well, I will tell you that my wife and I visited Ireland twice. And on the first trip, I did have a digital camera with me, but I also had a standard film. These were those disposable cameras. And I told my wife, I said, look, we're going to make the promise that if we see something we want to take a picture of as we're driving along, we pull over and we take the picture. We're not going to think, oh, man, I wish you could go back and get that, because by the time you get back there, it's not quite the same. And so we did that. So I have hundreds of pictures, which is great, of Ireland. And I'm sure that you're doing the same thing. It's a little more difficult to have your phone, even your phone, let alone your camera, because it still takes a couple of 3 seconds to bring up the camera, unless you always have it up and ready to go, or let's say your digital camera is already it's fully charged all the time somehow, because sometimes you just miss them. But then I have another question for you in that regard. Do you ever feel as though, because this has been described, that you are actually missing the moment by taking a picture? In other words, you're looking through the viewfinder instead of looking at it with the naked eye and really seeing it in that full human eye the naked eye sphere, if you will.
Yeah, for me, I'm enjoying the scenery. Mm-hmm. It's to take the photograph. I'm not trying to capture that scenery. What I'm trying to do is I've got some feeling, maybe the scenery has provoked in me the elements of tranquility or love or whatever. Mm-hmm. And I'll start looking around like a painter would go to the store to buy the paint. I'm going to have a few moments here to put the capture in this image, what I'm going to need when I get home to build that photograph. So I see them separately. I'm not trying to capture that moment. Kind of like in one of Ansel Adams' book, I'm paraphrasing here. He says, you go out and there's the world's most gorgeous sunset, and you take it and you go home and there it is, just the way you remember it. He says, you only recorded God's work. But if I take that photograph and I come home and in black and white, I change the colors, I move stuff around so that when you view it, you feel the warmth of the sun, and he says, that's my work. Mm. Yeah, and so from that perspective, I'll enjoy that scene and not through the viewfinder. I'll pull up a rock and sit down and enjoy it, or that deer in the meadow, or whatever. Mm-hmm.
Are you a naturalist from the standpoint that you don't really want to have to touch up anything in a photograph or change some of the hues, put a filter on, this, that, and the other thing? Or
no. It's I'm like I mentioned earlier in the show, Ansel Adams could see pixels coming and felt that gave you all the tools you needed to create the moment that you wanted. Okay, so no, I'll change the hues. Like I say, sometimes I'll turn the negative all the way around. I've even gone as far as taking a scene of a lagoon or something and change the colors drastically, make it vertical, make it abstract, and keep fooling with it until it provokes that feeling that I had when I first looked at it and said, there's everything here to make a great photograph. Yeah. I'm not sure what it's going to be yet, but I'll know when I create it.
So you go from the photographer artist, if you will, to the pixel artist in just to kind of coin a phrase or create a term, and so your art isn't just taking the shot; it's then putting it on the computer and going from there.
All those in the book, right, and the ones in the back, those are all taken with an iPhone, and they're all edited on just my iPhone, not on the computer.
Oh wow!
They're just
Does that astound you? I mean, you obviously know the history of photography and the process that has been there for a century or more with photography coming in. Because I loved the hands-on part, not just taking the picture, but taking it all the way through to the finished print. I absolutely loved that process.
Yeah, I had all my photographs when I was taking a lot of black and white photographs with a 4x5 camera, view camera. They were all 16 by 20 or so, and silver gelatin prints. And I might spend half a day just trudging around Death Valley for one shot that I felt had the elements I needed to go back into the darkroom, and then sometimes hours and hours in the darkroom to get the photograph I wanted, with copious notes with each time.
Oh, wow.
And going through lots of paper, lots of different paper grades,
Gets
burning and dodging. And one photograph took me pretty much a year and a half before my craft level got to where I could get the photograph I wanted. And in order to do that, and I had worked so long with a view camera with swings and tilts, I thought, well, this enlarger is no different than that. And the camera upside down. You work in the darkroom, you know that. Yeah. So I take the easel and I start bending the easel, changing the lines of perspective.
Oh, wow.
On the paper until I got the photograph that I wanted.
Well, I even experimented in the darkroom, not with photographs, but with this plastic geometric puzzle. It was a clear plastic geometric puzzle. And I would put it together in a certain way. Then I'd place it on the paper, and then I would, of course, expose the paper and the light going through. And now I was always doing black and white. I was strictly black and white, simply because I didn't want to go to the trouble of dealing with color at that time. And I came up with some of the most remarkable images on the page. And again, I still have all of these things. I even put some of them on matboard. Have you played around, maybe not so much with plastic puzzles, but maybe with a multiple of negatives that you might expose to the same sheet of paper, of photographic paper? Or in this case, well, obviously we can do it today with like Photoshop and so forth, where you can superimpose and so on and so forth. Do you do much of that?
I didn't, but I got to hang around with a gentleman, Jerry Ulsman, who was a master at that. He'd have boats sailing off a cube of an ocean, or a made fist that turned into a woman's face. Wow. Fingers that would, beautiful tree, and the fingers would end up being the roots of a person's hand. And he did a lot of that with multiple negatives in the day, because we didn't have pixels and stuff. And for me, it was all black and white then, because we had control. As you know, you had control in the darkroom. It was things you could do to the negative. You had total control. Color, not so much.
Yeah.
You set it off and come back, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, you couldn't really fool with it much in the darkroom.
Yeah.
But so we all shot in black and white, and so that we could have that control over the image.
I will tell you that this brings to mind, all of a sudden this flashed in my mind, those little shops, those little kiosks, we'd call them today, sitting out in a parking lot where you would drive up and you'd drop your film off and you'd come back the next day or a week or whatever. It was called Photomart. And it was just this little building with someone sitting in there. I remember taking my 126 film to those places and having them developed and so forth. And by the way, it could be thousands, but I've got a box in the other room from where I'm right now. It's a fairly large wooden box that I built, and I store hundreds of photographs that I took that are from the 126, but also many of the black and whites that I took and processed myself. One of these days, I do want to digitize them. Have you done that with your original, I will call it, analog photographs?
In the one book, A 25-Year Perspective, I digitized my large analog, for use on a better word, in the first half of the book, and then compared it with the black and white photographs I shot with my iPhone in the second half of the book. And to show what can be done now, even with black and white photography. I still shoot a lot of black and white photography with my iPhone. It's, Ansel was right. We have total control now, and so I don't go out shooting photographs no more. I go out for long runs, and they seem to find me.
Yeah, I hear you. Now, so what you're telling me then is that the iPhone has the capabilities, since I don't have an iPhone, and I don't really take a lot of pictures. Matter of fact, I have to get my phone's camera fixed because for some reason it's not working. Be that as it may, but iPhone must have a filter where when you are actually taking the shot, you're looking at it in black and white?
Well, I'm looking at it in black and white. The camera's seeing it in color, but then in their editing program, you can just switch it.
Oh, I see. Okay, so you're not actually looking when you're looking at the screen to take the shot. It's in color.
Well, yeah, I think you can change it maybe to black and white. I don't, and because even though I'm looking at the screen in color, I'm seeing it in black and white. I'm looking at the shadow areas and the shades of gray that might be in that photograph.
Yeah.
That I want to deal with. And like I say, just with the editing program on the phone, there's so much control over the shades of grays and changing the contrast and the lighting and that kind of stuff that. I print 13 by 17 photos with that.
Wow. So before we wrap things up here, I want to ask you, what do you see as the future of both photography and also of writing? Because your books, for the most part, would make great audibles, with the exception of the photographs. So I'm curious, what are your thoughts on the future? So let's start with the photography aspect.
Well, the photography, I think, is, other than film that's going to be streamed all the time now, I don't think in 10 years you're going to be nobody's going to go to the cinema because of the cost of taking the family to the cinema that you can watch that movie on TV. Mm-hmm. Photography, I think, I don't know how much more it can progress than it is now. Like I say, I'm getting these award-winning shots off an iPhone. They're already digitized. They're easy to send around. So I think, I don't know where that's going to go. Writing concerns me. I mean, the cost of a hardcover book now is getting to be very, very expensive. And there seems to be a trend. All my books are both in an ebook, Kindle and Barnes and Nobles, whatever their brand is, and Moby and all that. And they're in an Audible. But it seems that there's more and more push to digitize the books. And I'm concerned that some of these large corporations that are buying up everything, pretty soon they're putting in the worldwide library to where people can just download your Kindle book and thousands and thousands of times, and the artist isn't going to get any payment for it. your work is just, you're working to fill their libraries.
Yeah.
You can see it on Amazon already. They're giving you 30 days to send back a book.
Yeah.
And when I check my books on Amazon, there seems to be pressure to say, you can buy this book a lot cheaper if you buy it in Kindle. And now they're starting a Kindle streaming process. It seems to be,
But
so we can use all the Kindle books.
Yeah, but I would venture that none of this is going to deter you from continuing to write. Not because you have a contract, but because you have these stories in you that you want to get out.
Yeah, you want to be read.
Yeah.
Don't ever give up your day job if you're a writer. You're never going to make a living off it. All writers have ended up working for a magazine or for an online newspaper or an advertising agency, and so you don't do it for the money. You do it because you've got something you want to say. For me, the emails I get from people that say what I've written has touched them in a place that has changed their life, especially this last book. I didn't realize the short stories would touch so many people, but I get emails from people that say, this story I've read twice, and it made me sit back and pour another glass of wine and think about and analyze my life, see where it's going, and the choices I've made and the choices I'm going to make in the future. Mm-hmm. And for me, that's more important than 10,000 books, because...
Well, I'll tell you, I'm kind of there myself, not only in terms of what I'm writing, but also this program and the guests that, like yourself who are on this program talking about the work that they are doing and their stories of life and living and all of that, all that is contained therein. And I want to thank Gary Smith, author of a collection of short stories and poems, for joining us here on Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan, your host. And Gary, before we wrap things up here, first of all, thank you so much for making so much time for us. I will just, a side note to our listeners, this was an interview in the making over the course of about a week or so, that we finally were able to bring it all together. And I really appreciate your flexibility in that regard, and really appreciate the work that you've done and the images that you've put forth. You have been given a great eye. The universe is guiding you, and I love just looking at some of these scenes. They're really cool.
Thank you very much for having me, and I look forward to any comments anybody makes on the webpage, GarySmithAuthor.com. All the books are there, and I look forward to hearing comments, good or bad.
Absolutely. I mean, I've gotten critiques on this program, and I've taken them to heart and really tried to think about that, because the critique was quite accurate. I will own the fact that, yeah, I do tend to go on and on with my stories, but it's a conversation, and that's the way conversations go. So,
as an artist, the worst thing that can happen, and particularly a writer, I think, for me anyway. So it's always a good story. I'd rather them say they hated the story because of this, because I know I've touched them. Yeah. That I provoked an emotion, than just a bland.
Yeah. Well, I have 3 final questions for you that I ask all of my guests. You may have addressed them to some degree during the interview, but I like to ask them directly. And the first of those 3 questions is, who is Gary Smith?
Wow. That's a very hard question to ask. I'm sometimes still trying to figure that out for myself on this long journey. I would say that I'm loyal to a fault. I'm honest to a fault, and probably the most important thing for me is love. I love seeing love between animals, love between human beings. That kind of interaction, I think, is just precious.
What is it that you hope to or want to achieve through the work that you are doing now?
Well, like we discussed, I want to touch people's lives, and I love hearing that I've done that. And that's probably the most important part. If I was going to have a grandiose idea, it would be a movie deal out of one of the books, But probably more important than that would be those emails I get from people saying that my unique perspective has given them a different slant on life, and they thank me for it.
And finally, what is your life's purpose?
My life's purpose. I've thought about this a lot over the years, and my life purpose is every day I want to wake up and help carry somebody's burden. I don't care if it's helping somebody across the street or an older woman putting her groceries in a car. I don't think there's enough of that around, and I look for those opportunities every day, and I feel that that's, my purpose.
Well, GarySmithAuthor.com is the website, which we will be linked to as well. We encourage you to get a copy of any one of his books, but especially the one we're talking about today, a collection of short stories and poems. Gary Smith, once again, thank you so much for giving us this time here on Tell Me Your Story.
Well, thanks for having me, Richard. I've enjoyed it a lot, and it's been a great conversation.
And we'll do it again. And we thank you for listening to and watching Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World, as we're giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. And until our next broadcast, podcast, videocast, love to Lal and Jeanette, I'm listening.